The number 4 slot on my list of beginner tips is actually several tips rolled into one. I'm going to show you the keyboard shortcuts that I use most frequently.
So the plan is this. We're going to go through each one of the keyboard shortcuts individually, and then I'm going to make some small changes to this composition here to show you just how large a part keyboard shortcuts will play in speeding up your workflow. Alright, so the first group is the Clipboard group. This includes cut, copy, and paste, and for that I'm going to grab the Marquee Tool here, highlight a section. Controller Command X is cut. That'll remove whatever section you have highlighted and put it on a clipboard space somewhere in the RAM, and then at any time you can hit Controller Command V and paste it back in the composition. Control C will do the same thing, except instead of cutting this image, it will only copy the image, so you'll have the image left in the place, and then you can paste it later on, and you have a copy of it. So the next group is pretty simple. It's the Tools group. These are just the tools that I use most often. Now, some of these tools I use pretty exclusively for illustration. For instance, the Brush tool and the Eraser tool I don't use too much in graphic design, but Brush is B, and that will bring up your brush. You can then just paint. The Eraser tool is E, so that's pretty simple, and then you just erase on whatever we just painted. Next tool is the Marquee Tool, which is M, and that will bring up a rectangular marquee that you can drag out. If you don't want a straight rectangular marquee, the next shortcut is L, which will bring up the Lasso. Personally, most of the time I use the polygonal lasso tool, so that's why that just came up, because that's what I have set. Any of these tool shortcuts you can change by holding down Shift and then pressing the shortcut key, and as you can see on the left hand side, that'll cycle through all the different options that we have for that tool. I'll switch back to the polygonal lasso. Next we have Fill, which is G. Fill tool. Go ahead and click in here. The last of the tools group we have is the Hand tool, which for this I'm going to have to zoom in a little bit. In any of the tools that you have active, you can always hold down the space bar, and that will move your view around. So if you need to move around to a different part of the image quickly without changing tools entirely, just hold down the space bar, and you'll be able to just move the image around. The next group of tools is the View group. This group is going to change how your screen looks. If you press Tab, that basically clears out your workspace so you can look at your image without all the tools and panels cluttering up the space. The next tool is changing your view. For that I'm going to zoom out, and if you hit F one time, that'll give you a full screen view with all the tools, which we can then hit Tab if you want. And if you hit F a second time, that'll clear your entire screen of tools and everything, give you a black background to work against. And if you want to change tools, simply come over here to your left and wait a second, and the toolbar will pop up, and you can then pick tools and continue working. Alright, so hit F again, and then I'm going to scroll back in. The next two on the View group are Controller Command 1, and that shows your image in its actual size. So this is mapped 1 pixel in your image to 1 pixel on your monitor. The next one down from that is Controller Command 0, and that will fit your image on the screen so you can see the entire image in your workspace. The next group is the History group. For that I'm going to paint a couple lines on here. The basic one in the History group is Controller Command Z. You're going to find that you press that an awful lot. If you have to step back further, Control Alt Z or Command Option Z will let you step back several steps in the history, and then if you want to step forward, Controller Command and Shift Z will let you step forward. Next we have the Transform tool, which is Controller Command T, which brings up the transform box around whatever area we have selected, and we can transform this however we like. One key that's not necessarily a hotkey, but it is a key modifier, and that's Shift. Now, if we undo this real quick, if I were to transform this, and I can just go in here and change the height and width, but if I hold down Shift, it's going to stay with the same ratio, the same height to width aspect ratio as it started, and I can resize it, and essentially this is just scaling. This is not transforming. On a similar note, if I then hold down Shift with the move key, normally I can move it wherever I want, but if I hold down Shift and move with the move tool, you can see it'll move it basically in a straight line. The reason that you have this variation here is because this is the origin. So if you picture over the origin, if you picture 4 lines, one going up, one going across, and 2 going diagonal. If we come back to the move button and hit Shift, we can move this in any of these axes. So that's why when we get back to the center, Photoshop gets a little bit confused because it doesn't know which direction you want to go with it. But once you get a little further away, it'll let you pull the image in a straight line. Another modifier key is Alt, and what Alt will do is if you have the Move tool selected, and you hit Alt and drag an image, it'll make a copy of that image. With the Alt key held down, if you scroll your mouse wheel, that'll zoom you in and out. Brush, if you hold down the Alt button, that brings up the picker tool, so you can pick a new color. So, as I said, this is another key that's not necessarily a shortcut, but it's a modifier, so depending on the tool that you're using, it gives you different options. Alright, I'm going to jump back into the transform tool here, Control or Command T. And the reason I want to do that is, let's say we want to transform this. The Numpad Enter is a special button which confirms whatever changes you're making. So if we just transform this and we want to get rid of the transform option so that we can just move around the space normally, it's essentially the same thing as saying, okay, I'm done, that's where I want to transform it. Now it's the same thing with text. If we just tap T here to bring up the text tool, and we type something, in order to close the text options and move on, if you hit the Numpad Enter, as you can see, it confirms your text changes. Later on, if we want to make some more changes, come back in, type something else, Numpad Enter confirms those changes. While we're on the numpad, the numbers on the numpad correspond to the layer opacity. So if down here we select layer 1, and then we hit 5, it's going to drop layer 1 to 50% opacity. If we hit 2 numbers in succession, like in, for example, 4-2, it drops it to 42% opacity. 99, 80, 37, and if you want to bring it all the way back to 100, just tab 0. 2 of the most important keyboard shortcuts are Control S, which is save, and this one you want to do all of the time. Basically, you want to train your hand so that whenever you're not doing anything, whenever it's idle, just hit Control S. Trust me, there's no auto-save feature in Photoshop, and this is going to come in real handy, saving often. The next one is Control-Alt-Shift-S, or Command-Option-Shift-S. That one's going to bring up the Save for Web and Devices dialog. If you're saving something that's eventually going to appear on the internet, Save for Web and Devices is the option to hit. Alright, now I'm going to change this image here, and when I do that, I'll call out all of the keyboard shortcuts that I'm using, so you can see how much it's really going to speed up your work. First thing I'm going to do is hit M, and that'll bring up the Marquee Tool. I'll make a selection here. Let's say we'll select this area. Control or Command T will bring up the transform options. I'm going to hold down the Shift modifier as I drag this out. Numpad Enter to confirm. V for the Move tool. And actually here, as I'm looking down, I notice I'm still on layer 0, so I'm going to hit Control X and Control V to bring that. Control X for Controller Command X to copy, and Controller Command V to paste. I'm going to bring that back up here. Now I'm going to create a new layer, and then bring up my rectangular marquee tool again. Hit G to bring up the fill tool. Here I'm going to drop the opacity, say, to 50%. Control D for deselect, which is one we didn't really talk about, but it's one that I use often as well. T for the text tool. Numpad enter to confirm the command. Control T again. Holding down the shift modifier. V for the move tool. Here I'm going to press the M again for the rectangular marquee, and I'm going to highlight a section here. V for the move tool, hold down the Alt modifier and Shift because I'm going to copy, and I want to copy this over in a straight line. Do the same thing again, make a second copy, pull it over to the other side, Control D to deselect, and there we have a brand new layout. Now again, that wasn't all the keyboard shortcuts in that particular little instance, but you can see in just that minute or so there, we changed the entire layout using all keyboard shortcuts, and our workflow was significantly sped up over having to constantly come back over here to the tool menu and select things, coming up to the edit menu, copy, edit, paste. So again, speeds up your workflow, makes everything a lot easier. Well, that's all for now. Please remember to comment, rate, and subscribe below, and send any questions that you might have to requests@mahalo.com. Thanks for watching.